So as a good starting point, Imal, just in case, for those viewers who might be non-technical or not from the BA space, can you kind of set the groundwork first and explain what exactly business analysis is before we get into, the other nuts and bolts of it?
Yeah, in simplest terms, essentially what a business analyst does is, in most medium to large size companies, business analysts are the people who help the organization enact some sort of a change. So, for example, if a company is interested in doing some process improvement because they want to save some money, or because the way that they're doing things is not taking full advantage of some of the new technology that exists, typically what they'll do is they'll have a business analyst that helps them figure out exactly what the problem might look like, what a possible solution might look like, and then work with the other teams inside that company to help implement whatever solution that the company chooses.
Right.
So essentially what the business analyst does is there's a set of activities and deliverables that business analysts will take part in to carry all of that out. But essentially, as a business analyst, you're helping your company enact some sort of a change inside the organization, and the type of change can differ from company to company, project to project.
Gotcha. And also the other definition, if you can get into it, Imal, is what is Agile?
Agile, I would say, is it's a software development philosophy. So traditionally, the way that software has been built is using waterfall. So waterfall basically has an organization figure out exactly what the solution is going to look like right up front. So there's a big analysis effort right up front. And then they have their development teams build out the entire solution. And only when all of that is done is when the end customer actually sees it. Some of those projects can take 6 months. I've been on projects that have been 2.5, 3 years long. So in a waterfall methodology, you would have the clients basically sitting there and waiting until the end of the project to get what they need. What Agile says is that you should strive to take that solution, whatever that solution is that you're delivering, try to break it up into smaller pieces and get it in front of the customer as quickly as possible to mitigate some of the risks of doing waterfall. And the risks of doing waterfall typically is that in waterfall projects, when you're completely out on your own and you're spending a lot of time building something that your client hasn't seen, you don't get any feedback. And so all Agile says is take your gigantic projects, split them down into smaller pieces, get them in front of the client as soon as possible so they can start to give you feedback, so that when you're finished the project, you give the client something that they actually want, as opposed to coming back to you and saying, this is completely off the mark.
Gotcha.
And so a lot of IT projects fail because of the fact that they don't have enough client input. And the purpose of the Agile development philosophy is to get clients engaged and to get products out a lot more earlier in the process, I would say.
Gotcha. Okay. So I guess kind of connecting this with what you kind of, started off with, that most, you feel that most, I think you said most organizations, right?
That's right.
Most organizations are not fit for a true Agile kind of, I guess, methodology or environment.
Yeah.
Can you expand on that, Email? I know that's kind of a very broad question, but maybe you can get into kind of break that down or whatnot for us. But what did you mean by that, and why is that the case?
I want you to look at the landscape of all companies really in two broad categories, okay? There are companies that are software companies that are very product oriented. So Google, for example, is a gigantic software company, and they have a product called Gmail. It's an example I like to use, right?
Yeah.
That is one category of companies that you may end up in as a business analyst, okay? But that is the much smaller group of companies that exist out there. So you'll have a Google, you have enterprise software providers like SAP, Oracle, Infor, right?
Right.
The business analyst jobs in those companies are I would say they're probably less than 5% of all the business analyst jobs out there. If you look at most business analyst roles that don't exist inside software companies, right? They exist inside companies like large insurance companies, big banks, pick any industry, construction companies. Every company that needs to implement some sort of a change inside its organization, and it's either a medium or large size organization, needs business analysts. And those non-software development companies have a completely different culture. They have a completely different type of environment. They're up against very different pressures than software companies are. A company like Google would not survive in the industry that they're in if they tried to build Gmail in a waterfall way. If you have a Gmail account, chances are that you notice that they do incremental changes. So you'll log in one day and you see, oh, wait, the button looks a little bit different. There are a couple of extra features here. They're running purely agile to be able to do that because they're doing continual releases. Most organizations, non-software organizations that build software to use internally can't afford to operate that way. The overhead's too big. There are a lot of different reasons we can get into. But what ends up happening with most companies that try to go agile is that they are sold on the idea of being quicker, being more agile. And when they try to implement it, they realize that they have so many constraints that prevent them from doing pure agile. And what they end up doing is they shift back into more of like a hybrid agile development philosophy, which basically takes some of the more beneficial aspects of agile, but they don't run a purely agile team. They don't do a lot of the stuff that agile asks for. And so for most business analysts who are trying to learn how to become a business analyst, I would say that try to ignore a lot of the industry hype that exists around doing pure agile. Understand the concepts, make sure that if you're in an interview, you can speak very intelligently to that development philosophy. But know that as soon as you get on the ground, even if the person you're interviewing with, the company you're interviewing with, tells you that they're agile, trust me, once you step inside that company, you're going to see that they are very far off of the ideal that agile wants them to be at. And you're going to have to perform in an environment that's not purely agile. Okay, so that's essentially what I'm trying to say here. I'm not saying don't learn agile. I'm not saying don't invest any time into it. Just make sure you're investing the right amount of time so that you're prepared to deal with what's on the ground when you get there.
Gotcha. Fantastic. I mean, so that was a pretty surprise. I mean, so what you're saying is only 5% of the actual BA roles out there, from what you're saying, Amal, is like purely 100% agile.
I would say, yeah, I would probably say even less.
Yeah.
But if you just do a common sense calculation, you'll notice most companies that exist in the world are not software companies. They make up a very tiny fraction of the companies that exist out there. Most companies are out there in industry. They're building buildings, they're building cars, they're doing all kinds of other things other than software, right? Those types of organizations have, like I said, they have so many constraints organizationally that prevents them from being pure agile. So like I said, in many of those organizations, their senior management, it really kind of buys into it. I can't tell you the number of times where I've spoken to a senior manager who says, hey, look, we're a purely agile shop, so you need to be ready for that. When I step on the ground, on site, I see that what the senior manager thinks is happening is completely different from the situation on the ground. And that is the norm in most organizations.
Gotcha. Okay. And I guess what you're saying makes very, I mean, perfect sense, Amal. Like, as you said before, when you were speaking, when you were kind of defining agile, agile comes from, it is a software development philosophy. So for it to exist in its pure form in a non-SaaS or non-software related organization, I mean, I guess that should be pretty, I mean, it makes perfect sense, right?
Exactly right. That's exactly. And I'm glad you said that, because most companies out there have a core competence, right? The core competence of an insurance company doesn't rest on the fact that they're a good software development team, right? Yeah. Their core competence is, hey, do I know actuarial science well enough to build the right products to be able to compete with my competitors? That is their core competency. Core competency of a software development company is build good software products. Software companies can't afford to do that in a waterfall way. They have to do it in an agile way, right?
Gotcha. So in these setups, Amal, where you're saying that, I guess there are these companies, they're taking bits and pieces from the agile mindset and the agile philosophy. Is that really? I mean, I would assume that it is still effective because it is in use and stuff like that. But does it kind of does it make it less effective, or like what are the negatives or the positives of this hybrid approach?
It's very effective. So the one company where I've seen agile done right had actually, it was a software company, but they hadn't even gone into doing Scrum or Kanban or any of the other methodologies that exist in Agile. They had built their own way of being Agile because they understood the forces that really are involved. But for more traditional companies, there are huge benefits in adopting some of the basic principles of Agile as long as they do it in the right way. So, for example, if an insurance company tries to do Scrum will say normally you should do 2-week development sprints, right? Yeah. And at the end of 2 weeks, you should release something to the customer. Most insurance companies that exist in the world, it would take you 2 weeks to get something from your development environment into production. Forget about all the development effort that it takes. So you can see that in an example like that, a company simply just can't do Scrum the way that Scrum prescribes it, right? What a company like that has to do is look at their own development cycles, right? So in a large, let's say you work for I won't name any insurance companies, but let's say you work for a large, company that does reinsurance.
Right,
they would look at themselves, if they have, 50, let's say 10,000 employees, they would say, our development life cycles can't afford to be 2 weeks. What we have to do is we have to do 2-month development cycles and try to release something at the, at about 2.5 month mark to our end clients, and then get our feedback, especially for larger initiatives. Now, many companies, many organizations out there do this. They say, look, we have this massive program that's going to take multiple years. We can't just afford to go away to do it. So let's release something to our end customers. Let's say in the first 4 months, let's get something out to them. And then after that, every 2 to 3 months, we'll try to get more things out to them. Companies who try to adopt that agile principle tend to do very well, because they mitigate a lot of the risks of waterfall without going purely agile.
Okay, gotcha. So from what you're saying, Amal, I mean, it's still a good approach, like, this hybrid kind of a way of doing things. But I guess what you're saying is, let's call it what it is. Like, let's not call it like, this is a pure agile environment. By the way, Amal, any reason why companies would kind of market themselves as, a pure agile shop when in fact they are more so hybrid?
So a lot of that, so in many medium to large size organizations, you got to understand that there's a gigantic disconnect between what management thinks is going on the ground versus what's actually going on the ground. And it's not, there's no nefarious causes for that, right? This is just the way large organizations function, is that you'll have a senior director or you have a vice president of an organization who's been sold on the idea of going agile. They're being told a lot of times, hey, we're doing agile as best as we possibly can, but them not understanding software development and not really understanding detailed operational level things that happen on the ground, they're going to believe that they are agile. So when I speak to a VP who says, hey, we're a purely agile shop here, that's exactly how we function, I say, well, let me get on the ground and let's see what level of agile you've implemented in your organization, and we can work with whatever you have, right? So the disconnect really has to do with the fact that senior leadership, a lot of times, in the effort of trying to just simplify things and not really understanding all the details on the ground, will just think that they're agile, but the reality on the ground is something very different.
Gotcha. Okay, fantastic. So we have some great questions here. So I'll take some of the questions, folks, but feel free, any questions you have for Amal, put in the comments. So we got Rajesh. So Rajesh, thanks for tuning in. So Rajesh says, Amal, could you also comment about hybrid approaches being used in some organizations? I have personally used waterfall agile approaches depending on the solution we're building. I guess you kind of touched on that already, Amal, but anything you want to add to that for Rajesh?
Yeah, I think hybrid agile is probably the optimum way of doing things for most organizations. So adopt some of the agile principles and do them in a way that your organization is comfortable with. They're trying to go purely agile is such a huge shift across many different aspects of an organization that it just, if an organization really pushes hard and tries to go agile, regardless of what happens, they're going to end up in a much more chaotic situation than they were in before. And so agile implementation can go wrong. I would say that most organizations should strive for the hybrid agile approach, because if they don't strive for it, they're going to end up there in the long run anyways, because they're not a good fit for pure agile.
Gotcha. Okay, fantastic. We got a question here from David. David, thanks so much for tuning in. So David says, if my team develops in-house software, and in brackets he put purchasing applications or internal surveys, etc., which methodology you suggest is better?
I would say try to go agile if the following conditions are true, okay? So your first condition is that your product has to have, you have to have the ability to split your product up into smaller chunks. Meaning that your first release of whatever product you're building has to be useful to the business. And that's what in the agile world, they typically call that the minimum viable product, or the MVP. So condition number one is can you build something useful to the business that is smaller than the full scope, and you can release it to them and they can actually start using it while they're waiting for the rest of the product to be built. If that's possible, I think you are a good fit for the hybrid agile methodology. The second is does your team internally have the capability of doing releases? Because doing regular releases, there's a cost to doing a release, right? Releases aren't free. So every time somebody has to do a release at the end of a 2-week sprint or a 1-month sprint, development on a certain area stops. There are other people who have to get involved inside the company to actually push things from development to test to production. There's a certain amount of testing. So there's cost to doing every single release. How many releases can you realistically afford to do as part of your project? So think that through a little bit. Culturally, can your developers, if you have developers who've been with you for 20 years and they've been on waterfall project, can they make enough of a mindset shift to be able to do regular releases and to deal with some of the pressures that Agile would have that they wouldn't see in waterfall? So if you meet those 3 conditions, I would say that you'd be a good fit for a hybrid Agile approach. Anything else I would say is probably more of a waterfall and just try to manage the risks of doing waterfall.
Fantastic, fantastic. So, David, I hope that helps, and thanks for your question, and thanks, Amal, for fielding that question. Rajesh says thank you. So that in response to your the advice you gave before, Amal. So, Amal, I mean, speaking of Agile, like, and you mentioned something really interesting right now about senior developers who might have been, very much used to a waterfall methodology. What are some of the key challenges you have faced? Like, I'm sure in your 15 years, you've faced these projects where you're transitioning maybe into an Agile mindset. What are some of the key challenges, and how can the viewers who might be going through something similar as BAs themselves in getting people to move into more of an Agile, even if it's a hybrid Agile kind of a mindset?
So just to be upfront here, most developers that I've worked with, most software architects that I work with would willingly do Agile if it was done right, okay? Mm-hmm. But because of the way that it gets implemented in most organizations, they are very averse to it, because in many organizations, Agile is just code for really unorganized or a little bit chaotic. Okay. The single biggest challenge for most organizations is the fact that management has expectations of Agile that Agile just wasn't suited for. They've been sold on the idea that they can do a lot more work in a shorter period of time. That is a fundamental misunderstanding of what Agile was intended to do. And so the biggest problem that most software developers have isn't with doing Agile work. It's with the fact that the management of the organization will come to them and say, hey, look, I know that we said that this was a 2.5-year project, but since we're going Agile, we need to get this done in 1.5 years. Mm-hmm. Completely wrong. And so that's why most developers give up, because they don't really have the ability to explain to most people what Agile is and what it should be. And so they tend to have a very negative view of it just because of the way that it gets implemented in most organizations. So I would say that management's misunderstanding of what Agile can do for them is probably the single biggest problem.
Gotcha. Okay, amazing. And we got a thank you from David. So David said, thank you very much for your explanation, Amal. Awesome. We got some feedback here from Helen. Helen says, good insights, Amal. Fantastic.
Thank you.
So Amal, we have some aspiring, and by the way, let me just give a quick shout out to some other individuals that tuned in. We got BT Nandu. Nice to